Hey everybody, as promised, here's a brief video designed to help and assist as you do the fun part of this paper and this project. You get to write up the results and then discuss so what, right? So the results will be just the facts represented in clean and concise ways that answer your research questions, or at least provide specific data related to your research questions, and then the discussion will make sense of it all and interact with previous research and attempt to explain for the reader why it matters and answer the so what question. So let's talk mostly about the results section, since that's where your groups are currently spending your time. And this graphic here is the most typical way that we represent our numeric results, and that's through a table that quickly captures a lot of data in a clean way for the reader. So often if I want to summarize the findings in terms of descriptive basic statistics, I will do this through a table, but we will talk about when and how to use a table versus what you might call a figure, which is specifically figures can be graphs or charts or visual diagrams. So we have tables and figures, and let's talk briefly about when and why you might use each. So a quick overview. The results section again is report the data. What did you find? Just the facts, nothing but the facts, so to speak. So I present the evidence that I actually attempted to explore my research question. So if my research question involved qualitative data to analyze a certain process, then I want to keep that in mind when I'm providing results. I want to give evidence that explains whatever process that I'm trying to explore through my qualitative research. And if my primary question, on the other hand, is a survey numeric question about how much of something is going on, or what is the frequency or percentage of hiring different types of people in a sport context, then my results are going to concisely demonstrate that I explored that quantitative survey-based question. But in both cases, whether it's numeric quantitative research or textual qualitative research, I use words first. I remind the reader what the study design was. This survey-based descriptive study attempted to address whatever, and then I list my variables again, like the methods section. So there's a couple sentences of introduction, and then you get to the actual results, and you start to use tables and figures in order to enhance your discussion. So a couple paragraphs, or maybe even just one paragraph first, summarizing the results, and then you quickly refer the reader to the table and figures that enhance and visualize your major findings. And a quick word about the difference between quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative folks will almost always, use both words and tables and figures to make sense of the data. Qualitative folks, you may only use words. Some of you may not use figures or images or tables just because it doesn't enhance your discussion. If it does enhance your discussion, then you can use those as well. But you don't feel like you have to force qualitative findings or themes into a picture. If it works, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. Whereas often, if you have a lot of data, it only makes sense that you can capture that data a lot more cleanly and simply on a table than just spelling it out through long paragraphs for the data. And a reminder then, the next section that you'll write after the results is the discussion section, where you actually analyze the data and you sort of weigh in on what it means. And this is where you explain your data related to previous studies. How does it complement previous studies? How might it differ or contrast with previous findings? And what do you think that might mean related to your research question? So this is where you develop a logical argument that basically answers the so what question related to your research question. What does your data mean in context? So you want to be concise and as clear as possible, and you don't want to overstate what your data is actually saying, but you want to organize the results and the discussion section for clarity and understanding. So let's move on. In the results section, I want to emphasize major themes on the qualitative side, or major effects, or let's say group differences. If you're comparing multiple groups, you want to explain what you found, and you want to organize according to important data categories. As I've said, on the qualitative side, you'll begin with listing your major themes. After in-depth qualitative analysis, the following 3 or 5 or whatever themes emerged from the interview transcripts, and then you list your themes. And then from there on, you'll start to explain how you arrived at those as your themes. So you'll use quotes to provide a paper trail and to provide evidence that your themes really do explain whatever qualitative research question you're trying to address. On the quantitative side, you often start with descriptive statistics. Remember, this is basically summarizing the data overall. How many people scored a certain level? What were the average scores, let's say, of group 1 versus group 2? Or what were the percentages of the different categories that you measured? So descriptive data is basic summary level data. And then some of you, whoever actually did group comparisons, or one of you I know did a correlation, where you're measuring the relationship between 2 sets of numbers, those will be called inferential statistics. Those are the analyses that I will help you more directly with, since we didn't discuss them in class. And that's what you usually end with in the results section on the quantitative side. That's your big fireworks, display and your major findings. So we use words to capture the descriptive data first, and then we lead them to charts and tables and figures related to any higher level analyses that some of you may have analyzed. Okay, so a couple of slides. The majority of this talk will be on what it looks like to represent your data in clear and concise ways. And a couple of reminders. I'm not looking for each of you to use each one of these types of tables or figures. The point again is use whatever enhances your data and whatever gives the reader a sense of what you found. Some of you will only use basic tables. Some of you will primarily use intermediate or advanced tables. Some of you won't use tables at all. You'll use a figure, such as a chart or a graph. It's your choice. I'll give you visual images, and then obviously you tailor it toward your data, and I'm happy to help be a sounding board as you work through this. Obviously, basic tables and basic figures are meant to store a large amount of data. So for those of you doing survey type research, you have a lot of data, and your reader doesn't want to look through all of it. Your reader wants to get a feel for your data through a snapshot, and basic tables or figures are this snapshot, and especially tables store basic information well. So you might have, if you collected data on 50 people, and you want to capture their demographic variables, like how many of them were a certain gender or a certain age, or if you're doing athletic performance type, some of you are doing athletic performance measurements, so body fat, whatever, jumping height, whatever it is that you might have examined, if you want to summarize all 50 of them through average scores on a bunch of different characteristics, you slam it into a table and you refer the reader to the table, because it's not your major finding, but it is something that you want to give the reader a snapshot of. And here we have an example of a basic table that could capture what I just referred to as demographic data. So all these variables, let's say age, height, in this case, body weight, body mass index, blood pressure, you can capture it very quickly. N is the number of subjects, N equals 10, and you can capture very quickly 2 different groups of 10 people each, and then you have 6 or 7 variables. This is an easy table that you can make in Microsoft Word or any other word processing. And then here is another one that is actually from a published study. See, you notice how many different variables you can capture and how quickly you can capture it. And if that's you, if your data, there's a lot, you collect a lot of data on a lot of people on a lot of different variables, please use a table since it's the quickest way to provide a snapshot. Next, we have intermediate tables and figures. These are higher level instruments to show trends in data. So specifically, figures and charts are ideal for showing trends. So let's say you're comparing 2 different groups based on average difference in scores, or you're trying to, on the qualitative side, capture a process, a linear process involving lived experience or subjective experience, cognitive processing of different social phenomenon. Intermediate charts can help you capture a more advanced level of information. So I'll just highlight a couple slides demonstrating an intermediate level of a figure or a chart. So this is obviously a chart, but in this case it shows a comparison of 2 groups. Actually, the same group measured 2 different times. So these are a bunch of pre-test and post-test measurements of the same group on aerobic fitness, body composition, strength, and endurance. And what we're doing is comparing the same group pre and post on these variables. So we have one comparison here, another comparison there, a third comparison with these 2, and a 4th comparison here. So it's a nice way to give visually significant findings. This asterisk just means that the difference between this pre-test group and this post-test group on the same measurement was significantly different at a statistical level. So, you know, research, just the fancy way of showing that visually is just putting an asterisk on top, and you have a nice way to compare the group on these 4 different measurements. Another way you can do it, and you can have some fancy statistical software doing this, but whereas in the previous example, I just used Microsoft Excel to give a nice color graphic, so feel free to use that. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you can YouTube it, but I can also help you if you like. This is from a statistical software package. Certainly I don't expect you to be able to do this, but it's the same idea, comparing a group pre and post. In this case, they used black and white to give a visual standout for you. But the idea, again, with intermediate figures is to compare groups over time or across different tests, or maybe on the qualitative or the survey side, if you want to show differences based on word categories or survey questions and things like that, you could capture the same intermediate level of data through this sort of figure. In this case, it looks like it was basically correlations or predictive models, but the point is not to get lost in the stats. The point is to see that they're trying to compare people based on categories that are more qualitative or descriptive survey in nature. And here we have a truly qualitative example of an intermediate figure. The idea being the major themes are listed in the left side, or the first category. So the specific themes don't matter, but the idea here is there's different levels of I don't know, demographic influence. So there's intra and interpersonal, and then they saw some other main category called community-based influence. So they basically had 3 major themes with 2 sub-themes under interpersonal major theme. And then to the right side, they used the quotes to provide evidence of the themes on the left side. So if you had some really important quotes, and there were several of them, and you didn't want the reader to get lost reading it in text, you might stick this type of qualitative intermediate figure. In this case, they made it into a table, again in Microsoft Word. And then you refer the reader to that table or to that figure. You don't have to do this if you've collected qualitative data. Sometimes it makes sense to put these quotes right in the middle of your text, of your results and discussion, and then under subheadings of your major theme. So what I forgot to say, but I'll say it now, is sometimes in qualitative research, you don't use the term results and discussion. You might combine them and call it a discussion of findings. So often that's what qualitative research will call it. Instead of results, they'll say discussion of findings. And then you'll identify your themes and you'll start using quotes to provide evidence of your themes. If you like, you can refer them to a table here. For those who like to give visual representation, you don't have to. So our final couple of slides will give examples of advanced tables and figures. In keeping with our pattern here, if basic just stores data and intermediate starts to show trends or group comparisons or process in a qualitative side, then advanced are meant again to provide the deepest level of evidence. So in the quantitative side, it would be trends by group over time. So anytime you collected multiple measurements of the dependent variable, let's say, I can think of the basketball study in our class this semester. You're trying to compare people over a significant amount of time. It would make sense to provide a more advanced table. And let's give you a couple examples here. So here we have our first example of an advanced figure. And again, the specifics don't matter, but the point is to look at what it allows us to do. It allows us to, where are we? There we go. It allows us to compare groups, 1, 2, 3, over multiple data points. This could be week 1, week 2, week 3. It could be day 1, day 2, day 3. It doesn't really matter. But we have this preliminary test among the 3 groups. And then we chart the different change in individual groups over the series of data measurements. So this allows us, especially if the groups fluctuate quite a bit over time, obviously it allows us to capture that those changes over time. You would use this if you want to capture visually these changes over time. So sometimes you have to play around with different tables. You have your data, you see what it looks like visually, and you're trying to decide how to best represent it. So you notice sometimes this is trial and error, and you'll go with a chart versus a graph, depending on what gives the best visual evidence to explain your data. So a reminder, don't stress out feeling like you have to use a bunch of different charts and tables and figures. The point is to find the most relevant tools for showcasing your data. And for some of you, it will mean you don't use any. And for others, it will mean maybe you stop at a basic table. And for some, it will mean using more intermediate or advanced tools. So I just noticed that there are some odds and ends that I can capture here. Some of you might want to use, a chart. If you have a really striking, let's say you captured percentages based on different categories, and there was a really striking number of people who answered yes to a question versus no, or you had a lot more males than females in a certain group, then obviously you could use a chart like this in order to capture some extreme difference in percentages or in different responses to a survey question. So don't forget about these simple visual charts that can also help display your data. These are easy to make in Excel. And this is a scatter plot, so it's a graph. It's a specific graph that's often used in correlational statistics. So a couple of you ran correlations, and basically it's used to show the strength of the relationship. And for those who remember this from your stats class, the closer you can get this to a diagonal line rather than a flat line, and the diagonal can run from left to right, can go high to low or low to high. But the closer you can get to this diagonal line, the stronger your correlation. So this is a nice way to capture important correlational data for those who might be using that type of statistical technique. It's called a scatter plot. I think that's it. I think that's what I wanted to show you and highlight. And feel free to look through these slides again to just get visual pictures of different ways that data can be organized. Remember, of course, too, that you should be looking at studies from your literature review and copy what you like. If you did a qualitative study, look at the other qualitative studies from your literature review to see what their results section looks like. Obviously, you can benefit from that and use it. Okay, good. So I'm scrolling through and I captured all the things that I wanted to capture. And just as I said that, I realized there's one slide that I'll point out. For those doing qualitative research, take a look on the PowerPoint. I provided an example of kind of an intermediate qualitative word table, but this should be read linear left to right. This is an example of a coping process related to stress among, in this case, female collegiate volleyball players. The idea, though, it's organized by player, and it gives you a nice example of what these ladies said. So this is a qualitative study related to different questions and prompts in the interview. And basically, they provided a nice summary of how each athlete, female volleyball player, worked through the coping process. So this is just an example. If you wanted to describe key ways that interviewees responded to a certain process that you're investigating, this would be an example of how to display that. Okay, so remember, I'm here for you. I'm here as you need for one-on-one meetings on the qualitative side and the quantitative side. Please reach out. And I think for class this week, remember, I wanted to see your preliminary results, and then I'll give you some quick feedback so that you can prepare your final presentation to be given in the next couple of weeks according to which date you signed up for. So thanks for listening. Please reach out as needed. Have a great day.